All right, so you sent over this document about China's new anti-money laundering law.
Yeah,
And wow, it's a big one, to say the least.
it
I
is.
mean, we're talking potentially a global shift in how we fight financial crime.
Absolutely.
And I know you're deep in this world, so let's break down exactly
Right.
what's changed and what it could mean,
Sure.
especially for your work.
Yeah, happy to.
So to start, for anyone who maybe hasn't had a chance to read through this whole thing,
Mhm.
can you give us like the big picture overview?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is China taking major steps to align its AML framework
Mm-hmm.
with the standards set by the Financial Action Task Force.
Okay, the FATF.
The FATF, exactly.
Right, right.
This new law, which passed in January of 2025,
Hmm.
really signals their commitment to cracking down on money laundering.
And that's huge because for a long time, China's approach was
Yeah,
kind of behind the curve.
a little bit, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
This feels like a complete overhaul.
for sure.
One thing that really jumped out at me
Yeah.
was how it's not just focused on banks anymore.
That's right, yeah. One of the most impactful changes, I think, is
Okay.
the introduction of designated non-financial businesses and professions.
So DNFBPs.
DNFBPs, yeah.
Okay, so break that down for me.
So now we're talking about real estate agents, lawyers, accountants, and even
yeah.
company service providers. They're all held to the same AML standards as banks.
So like anyone who could potentially be used to move dirty money around
Exactly.
is now under the microscope?
Precisely.
Wow.
So these DNFBPs, they now have to implement robust compliance programs,
Okay.
conduct due diligence on their clients, and report any suspicious activity.
So that closes a major loophole
Yeah, it closes a major loophole.
that criminals have exploited for years.
Oh, for years, yeah.
So we're casting a wider net.
Mhm.
Okay, so what about enforcement?
Okay.
Because the penalties for AML violations in China previously weren't really a deterrent, were they?
No, they weren't.
No.
Not really, but this new law brings a significant increase in penalties for noncompliance.
Okay.
And we're talking much larger fines, even the ability to restrict the business activities
Mhm.
of companies that fail to meet the requirements.
That definitely raises the stakes.
Yeah,
It seems like the focus isn't just on punishing bad behavior after the fact, right?
Right.
There's a big emphasis on preventing financial crime in the first place.
absolutely. So the new law prioritizes a proactive approach.
Okay.
And a key part of that is mandatory list screening.
Okay.
So this applies to everyone, not just financial institutions.
Mhm.
They're required to check all their clients against government lists of terrorists, sanctioned individuals,
Right.
high-risk entities.
So it's like a giant do not do business with
Yes.
list
Yeah,
that everyone has to consult before engaging in any transactions.
that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, if someone tries to do business with a flagged individual or entity,
Right.
it raises immediate red flags.
Yeah.
And the transaction likely wouldn't go through.
Makes sense.
And it's all about disrupting criminal networks before they can even get started.
Now, this next part is particularly interesting, I think,
Yeah.
especially for the type of investigations you do.
Right.
We all know about shell companies.
Yes.
These shadowy entities designed to hide the true owners of assets.
Mm-hmm.
This new law takes direct aim at that, right?
It does. So China has established a National Ultimate Beneficial Ownership Registry.
Okay, a UBO registry?
UBO registry, yeah.
Okay,
It's essentially a database that reveals the true owners of companies,
I see.
no matter how complex their ownership structure might be.
So for you, this means you'll be able to follow the money trail much more effectively,
Exactly. Yeah.
potentially uncovering these hidden connections,
Right.
criminal networks that were previously obscured
Mm-hmm.
by layers of shell companies.
Exactly. Yeah. It significantly enhances transparency.
That's a game changer.
It is. It makes it much harder to launder money
Yeah.
through these convoluted ownership structures that criminals love to use.
So this new AML law is clearly a major development.
Yeah.
It brings China more in line with international standards
Yeah.
and demonstrates a real commitment to fighting financial crime on this global scale.
Absolutely.
But as we both know, having a law on the books is one thing.
Right.
Making it work in practice is another.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So the real work begins now.
It does.
And there are some significant challenges ahead,
There are.
especially for financial institutions and DNFBPs
Absolutely.
on the ground.
Yeah.
So let's dig into those challenges in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've laid out all the key changes in this law.
Yeah.
It's ambitious,
It is.
but as you know, the devil's in the details.
No, always.
Our source document kind of pointed out some potential roadblocks
Right.
on the path to implementation.
Yeah.
And I think those raise some really interesting questions, especially given your focus on risk management. So one of the biggest things that jumped out to me is this idea of balancing these heightened regulatory expectations with maintaining operational efficiency.
Right. I mean, financial institutions and DNFBPs are now facing this whole new layer of compliance tasks.
Yeah.
And that can be a heavy lift.
It's like they've been given this massive new playbook.
Right.
But they still have to figure out how to integrate it into their existing game plan without dropping the ball
Absolutely.
on their core operations.
Right.
And I imagine that's where the risk-based approach comes in.
Yeah.
That this law keeps emphasizing. But from what I've read, that's kind of easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. A risk-based approach means that not every customer, not every transaction needs to be treated with the same level of scrutiny.
Right.
So it's about assessing the level of risk involved and tailoring your compliance efforts accordingly.
So give me a real-world example
of
how this would work in practice.
Okay, so let's say you have two customers, right? One is a long-standing customer.
Okay.
Well-established business, consistent transaction history, no red flags.
Got it.
Under a risk-based approach, their due diligence might be more streamlined.
Okay.
Focusing on just confirming existing information, monitoring for any changes in their risk profile.
All right, that makes sense.
Now, the other customer, let's say, this customer is brand new to the bank, dealing with large sums of cash. Their business involves multiple jurisdictions. There's limited publicly available information about them.
All right, so red flags.
Yeah, this customer would be considered higher risk. So their due diligence would be much more extensive. Deeper background checks, enhanced transaction monitoring. Potentially even ongoing reviews of their business activities.
So it's not about treating everyone the same.
No.
It's about focusing your resources where the risks are the highest.
Precisely.
But that also means institutions need to have the systems in place to accurately assess those risks.
Absolutely. And that's one of the key challenges here.
Right.
Institutions need to invest in data analytics, risk modeling, and expertise in financial crime to really effectively implement this approach.
And it's not a one-and-done deal.
It's not.
Right. The risk landscape is constantly evolving.
Always, especially with the rapid pace of technological change.
Exactly.
So what's considered high risk today might be different tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Continuous monitoring and adaptation are essential. Institutions need to stay ahead of those emerging threats.
Right.
Understand how criminals are exploiting these new technologies. Adjust their risk assessment processes accordingly.
So that's a lot to juggle.
It is.
Our source document didn't just point out these challenges, though.
Right.
They outlined 4 strategic areas where financial institutions are really focusing their efforts to meet these new requirements.
Yes.
I'm curious to get your take on these, especially given your expertise in financial crime compliance.
Of course. Let's break them down.
Okay.
The first is data lineage and governance.
Okay.
Which really forms the foundation of effective AML compliance.
Got it.
Institutions are putting a lot of emphasis on making sure they have a comprehensive and accurate understanding of their customer data.
So knowing where that data comes from, how it's collected, how it's stored, how it's used.
Yeah, basically creating a clear audit trail.
Okay.
So they can trace every transaction back to its source.
Okay.
And they're focusing on integrating all that customer data into a centralized platform so they can have a holistic view of each customer's risk profile.
Okay, that makes sense.
The next strategic area is high-risk scenarios, which I think is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
But how this plays out in practice is...
How does that actually work?
It's about understanding the specific types of activities or customer profiles that present a higher risk of money laundering or other financial crimes.
Right.
So, for example, transactions involving politically exposed persons.
Okay, so PPs.
PPs, would automatically trigger enhanced due diligence.
So it's not just about having a general understanding of risk.
No.
It's about developing these tailored procedures and controls for very specific high-risk situations.
Exactly.
What about continuous KYC?
Right, so this goes beyond just checking those boxes.
Yeah.
During that initial onboarding process.
Right, so it's like ongoing monitoring.
It is, ongoing monitoring and due diligence.
Okay.
Throughout that entire customer life cycle.
Got it.
Institutions are realizing They need to be very vigilant in detecting any changes in customer behavior, business activities, risk profiles.
So keeping tabs on things like changes in their business model or unusual transaction patterns, negative news, legal issues.
Exactly.
Anticipated with them.
It's all about making sure the information you have stays current and accurate.
That sounds like a pretty resource-intensive process.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be, but it's crucial for mitigating risk.
Okay, so the last strategic area highlighted here is combating emerging threats, which is maybe the most dynamic and challenging of all.
It is.
This is the one that feels like a constant game of cat and mouse.
Absolutely.
Criminals are always finding new ways to exploit the system, especially as technology keeps evolving. So what are some of the emerging threats?
So one major concern is the rise of telecom fraud and online scams.
Okay.
Criminals are using these increasingly sophisticated tactics to deceive individuals and businesses, often leveraging social engineering and advanced technology to steal money and personal information.
And I imagine the anonymity and decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies also poses a challenge.
Absolutely. The source documents specifically mention that combating crypto-related crime is a top priority.
Makes sense.
For Chinese authorities, they're working on implementing robust regulations for cryptocurrency exchanges and service providers. And they're investing heavily in technology to track and trace cryptocurrency transactions.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
Involving regulation, technology, international cooperation. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
And it seems like the work is never truly done.
That's the nature of AML compliance. It's a constantly evolving field. And institutions need to be adaptable and proactive to stay ahead of the curve.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From the specific changes in the law to the challenges of implementation and the strategic priorities for financial institutions. I think this has given a really solid foundation for understanding the impact of this law.
I agree.
Especially as you continue your own work in this area.
It is a very significant development.
For sure.
For sure.
But before we wrap up, I want to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. This is a major shift in China's approach to AML.
It is.
And it's bound to have ripple effects throughout the global financial system.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well,
it's definitely hard to ignore this development.
It is.
We've talked about how China is aiming for this more internationally aligned approach to AML. But what I keep thinking about is this ripple effect. Is this going to put pressure on other countries to step up their game?
I think it will.
Could this actually shift the landscape of global finance?
That's the question everyone's asking.
It is. It is.
And I think a lot of people are watching very closely what happens next. China's economic influence is undeniable. And when they make a move like this, it's bound to have an impact. It's going to put pressure on other countries for sure.
Especially those that have been lagging behind.
The ones that have been a little bit slower.
In terms of their own AML regulations and enforcement. Because tighter controls in one country often just push criminal activity to another.
That's right. It's like squeezing a balloon.
Exactly.
The pressure just shifts.
It just goes somewhere else. So if China's closing all these loopholes, the criminals are going to be looking for weaker points in the system.
Absolutely. And that's why international cooperation is going to be so important here. This isn't something any one country can solve on its own.
We've got to work together.
We do. We need a coordinated global effort to be effective, to really combat financial crime on this scale.
Do you think this new law could be a catalyst for that kind of cooperation?
It's certainly possible. I mean, China has been more and more active in international organizations.
Like the FATF.
Like the FATF, And they've been signaling their commitment to working with other countries on AML issues. So this new law
could be seen as a very concrete step in that direction. And it might encourage other nations to follow suit.
To kind of get on board.
To get on board, both in terms of strengthening their own regulations, but also collaborating more effectively on cross-border investigations and information sharing.
That makes me think about your work specifically. Knowing how interconnected the financial system is. Do you think these changes in China will directly impact investigations even outside of their borders?
I think it's inevitable. As China's AML regime becomes more robust, it's going to be harder and harder for criminals to use that system to launder money.
Makes sense.
So they'll be looking for alternative routes, which could lead to increased criminal activity in other countries.
So investigators are going to need to be even more vigilant.
They are. They need to be ready to track those flows of illicit funds.
And understand how these changes might be shifting the patterns of global money laundering.
It's like a whole new game.
It is. It's a new landscape. And it highlights the need for investigators, compliance professionals around the world to really stay informed.
Stay ahead of it.
Stay ahead of it,
Wow. Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
From the specific changes in this law. The challenges, the strategic priorities. We even touched on the global impact.
It's a big one.
It is. I want to end on a positive note, though.
Okay.
It seems like this is a step in the right direction.
I think so.
A move towards a more transparent, accountable financial system.
I agree.
So what are your final thoughts?
I think it's a significant development. There will be hurdles along the way.
Of course, there always are.
But I think it has the potential to make a real difference. In the fight against financial crime. It's a reminder that even in a complex, ever-changing world, we can make progress.
We can.
Toward a more secure and equitable financial future.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
It is something worth celebrating.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more insights.
Yes.
And analysis on the topics that matter most to you.